Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting ICPS Roundtable. Today's topic is growing highland Nepenthes. I am Kenny Coogan, the Community Relations and Education Director. I serve on the board, and I'm wearing the super cool t-shirt with Pinguicula primuliflora on it. And if you want this t-shirt or a couple of our other designs, you can find the link in the description below. And the proceeds from that goes to our conservation or education initiatives. And one of our education initiatives is to fund teachers in K through 12 schools, public and private, with money to add carnivorous plants to their classroom. So if you think that's a worthy endeavor, or if you even remember that defining moment when you first learned that plants could eat animals and you feel inspired, buying a tote bag, a t-shirt, a notebook with some ICPS logos and drawings on it is a great way to support that cause. All right, so today we're going to be talking about growing highland Nepenthes, and I am going to have the panel introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm François May from France, Carnivorous plants enthusiast for more or less 20 years now, and I'm working on the taxonomy of a genus, especially the species from Indochina and Malaysia.
My name's Tom. I run a website on carnivorous plants called Tom's Carnivores. Enthusiast for a similar amount of time, probably about 20 years. My favorite genus is Nepenthes, and I run a small nursery here in the UK.
Hi, my name is James Falconio, enthusiast of Nepenthes and all carnivorous plants out of Clearwater, Florida. Co-owner of Clearwater Carnivores, kind of just a little startup to share our passion with others local and educate them. That's it. Oh, Tom, nice to meet you finally. We've talked via email and sharing your link to your database.
I thought we had, yeah. No, nice to meet you too.
I'm Drew Martinez. I'm the owner of Carnivero. I've been growing Nepenthes for 27 years now. Let's see. I had the privilege to be able to visit, about half the genus in its native habitat to observe growing conditions. And I'm always learning more and more about plant growing conditions and genetics and all that sort of stuff. So looking forward to the discussion.
And I am Hawken Carlton, owner of Carlton Carnivores, a little startup I'm trying to work on for education and conservation of carnivorous plants and wildlife. I've been growing carnivores for probably close to 20 years, like a lot of you, it seems. And the Nepenthes are my favorite genus as well.
All right, very good. So I'm glad that we have such a diverse roundtable with people exploring Nepenthes in the wild habitat, seeing dozens and dozens of them. And then we have some growers who are very prominent on social media, on their website. So I'm excited for this discussion. So one thing that most people probably know is that highland Nepenthes, this is just a construct that growers have created. It refers to the plants that live in higher elevations. And one thing that most people think, or maybe they assume, is that highland Nepenthes require a temperature drop at night. So is this true? How accurate is that saying? And for those of you who have seen them growing in the wild, have you experienced this night drop? So we're going to start with Hawken. I know you're cultivating them in, I think, Colorado. So how are you achieving year-round temperature to make them happy?
So my setup is a bit of a cobbled together thing because I work on a fairly low budget. So I just use a small evaporative cooler in the little greenhouse that I have. And so I will add ice packs, or at this time of year, snow, to help cool down that cooler as well, to drop the temperatures. And a lot of the species definitely show a preference for when it is cooler overall. So during winter, a lot of them grow a lot happier. So I've got Aristolochioides that is flowering at the moment. That's one of the species that is a little bit pickier when it comes to temperature. So yeah, it's Something that kind of brings just the general temperature down at least 10, 15 degrees more than 15 degrees Fahrenheit more than it was during the daytime.
In the wild, you definitely observe it, right? It's let's see, there's this effect. I might be butchering the name. It's like the Mesenhungerberger effect, where every 100 meters or every 200 meters you ascend on a tropical mountain, it drops like 1 degree Celsius, right? So, whenever you're dealing with highland Nepenthes, just inherently, it's going to be cooler up there. There are going to be micro climates that are up on these mountains, especially mountains that have like a windward side, versus not. So you can actually see or experience temperature drops just going from one side of the mountain to the other. But I'd say just in general, I've observed in the wild, it's cold. It's cold at night when you're up on those mountains. There's no way around that. Francois, I'm sure you could say.
It really is. I mean, I've been growing highland Nepenthes for quite a few years now, and sure, there are some species that are more tolerant than others, but I have yet to hear from other species that can be really grown in, let's say, lowland conditions. I mean, at one point they're going to sulken and they're going to die, either if it's for 6 months, after 6 months, or 1 year.
I would say that there's a process that we have some very sophisticated greenhouses at this point. I'm essentially in sea level in Texas, right? And so it's hot here. In summers our nights do not drop below 75 some days, or 75 degrees Fahrenheit, right? That's, I don't know, it's 20 some odd degrees for all you other people out there on non-imperial units, right? We actually have an air conditioned greenhouse. It's a hybrid system that it actually senses what the wet bulb temperature is on the outside, and we determine, can we get there using evaporative cooling, or do we need to turn on the air conditioning system? And I definitely have to I don't want to use the air conditioning system. I don't want to have to drop the temperature, but just running a business, I have to use it certain times a year, because otherwise I have plants that are starting to tank. So we've really experimented a lot with kind of the bounds of how much you can get away with dropping night temps. There's different species that we found that are more tolerant than others, and it even led us to the extent to where we actually built a room that it's essentially it's an insulated grow room, an incredibly well insulated grow room, where we have some plants that are even intolerant of even warm day temperatures in there. And so that was the thinking. That was, in the other greenhouse, we could always drop the night temperatures to where they were happy, but whenever you're fighting the sun, it's just so much energy that you really need kind of more of like an insulated room for it to be like economical, right? I'm running enough air conditioners as it is in the other room. So we found that grow room is actually a good place for some of the ones, like Nepenthes diabolica, or some of the other ones that are just completely intolerant of warm temperatures.
The challenge here in the UK is often like a bit different in that it's much colder than they would like most of the year round, right? So I have to heat my greenhouse for sort of 3/4 of the year. What I found is interesting though, is that without doubt, they are happiest around spring and autumn for me. And that is where nighttime temperatures are generally, sort of 10 degrees or so, and I don't really have to heat it at all. But then there's enough sun in the day that you get that nice differential between day and night, and it's kind of the perfect conditions for them, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, day, night and day. What I have also found though, Kenny, you mentioned, like, do they require a drop? I don't heat my greenhouse in the winter anywhere above 12 degrees. It just kind of, when we've got like, sub-zero nights, it kind of just gets too expensive. So I just kind of heat to a baseline of about 12 degrees Celsius day and night. And in the depths of winter, there's no real rise in the daytime. It just is steady 12 degree temperature all the year round. And they're not as happy as they are in the spring and the autumn, but most of them will sort of tolerate it. So yeah, that's, I think, worth mentioning for anyone wondering whether in a similar situation as me.
Now, before James tells about his setup, I will remind listeners that the ICPS has a quarterly newsletter. And recently, James published a whole article on his repurposed structure. So go ahead, James, tell us how you're in Florida. How are you managing your highland setup?
Oh, this is a deli dessert display case. So I override. It's a little 3-foot cube, all glass, LED on the outside, on top, which, because it's all glass, I can do that. Florida trying to keep down on the heat. This time of the year, today we hit what, about 77, 78. So this did kick on a few times because it tried to get up to about 82. This is its 3rd year in operation, and it's really not meant to be outdoors. It is a covered porch, but it is wide open here. So as far as power consumption, electricity monthly for something this size, is very, very little. I mean, under $10. Okay. I mean, I'm running LED, so we overrode the thermostat down below. Took a normal Honeywell thermostat for your house, a 4-stage programmable. So this will go from this I run at 77 all day, and then it gradually steps down to where by midnight, this one here hits 60 degrees. And then it'll hold the 60 from midnight to 5 a.m. And then it shuts, and then it goes back to its 77, and it gradually comes back up as the day begins. Now, this is a quarter. This is my highland chamber. This is a quarter of the size of the floral chamber I picked up for $200. And I'm testing that. It's a completely closed loop system. This one isn't yet, but I'm almost there. I'm actually waiting on a new fogger today because I have Drew on the phone. So I'm running this. This is Truncata D, Loei Trismatiensis.
that.
Yeah,
Great.
0061.
Mhm.
Okay, so let me show
Yeah.
you. There's that one there. There's this one.
Mhm.
Then there's this giant.
Yeah, that looks
Okay.
awesome.
And beautiful, beautiful.
Mhm.
And of course you can see the new one. This plant, until I put it in this was an extra small when I got it a few years ago
Mhm.
from Drew, and it did okay in the house with a more consistent. I keep my house at 78 in the summer. Doesn't drop during the night, doesn't, and it was growing, it was doing, I threw it in this chamber with the temperature fluctuation.
Mhm.
And look at the leaf jumps.
So I know that we're talking in generalities, but
Yes.
there's so many different species and hybrids. It seems that a lot of them benefit from a temperature drop because that's how you'd find them out in the wild. If one person on the panel could answer this user's question, I found that for highland pitcher plants, it doesn't matter what the temperature in Celsius is during the day, as long as the temperature drops at night. Is this correct? Drew, you want to take that? And of course, we don't know exactly what species they're referring to, but.
Okay. I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but my experience has been, I know it's hopeful thinking, right? That people think, oh, if I just, it doesn't matter if it's like, I don't know, like 30 degrees Celsius, like 86 or so, like during the day, and I drop it 15 degrees, it's the delta that matters. I don't think that's true. I really don't. I've had people that, will buy the same plant over and over again, and I'll just say, look, man, like this is your 4th Hamada. I'm sorry, but it's really a stickler, like maybe let's steer you over the direction of a hybrid because I want you to be successful, right? And I
Could you
tried.
repeat that again? You said what? That it doesn't matter.
I don't think it's a relative, like the people say, well, it's really the relative drop that matters. I think it's absolute. I think it actually matters that it is 70 something degrees during the day and it drops into the 50s at night. Because I've tried it the other way. I've tried to get that delta, going from like 85 down to 65. And yeah, your plants. So like there's a progression with highland Nepenthes that I've observed is that the roots go first, right? I like to think of Nepenthes growing as like you got something like a healthy plant is kind of like it's like a train, right? It's like it's on the tracks, it's going. It takes a lot to stop a train, right? So like, but once you're starting to get like maybe a month or more of like these non-ideal conditions, the roots start slowly going, and then you notice the plant gets a little bit chlorotic. Just the color changes ever so slightly, right, after about a month, and it's not, what tells me is like it's not uptaking nutrients as well, and then slowly over time it gets more and more withered, I guess, at the top. The growth reduces, and then at some point, like maybe 3 to 4 months later, after it's been exposed to higher temperatures, that's when you're actually going to see like there's no roots left on it. Like that plant is just you might as well just treat it as a rooted cutting, and that's so sometimes like I used to think, oh, there's just something about like August or September, like these plants are just crashing, but it's weird because like it's August or September and they've dealt with worse, like our July was awful, when really it's just the cumulative amount of non-ideal conditions that they've been getting over time. The roots started to go, and at some point the plant just you kind of have to start over.
I want to plant Nepenthes sibuyanensis. My environment is 25 to 33 in the summer. So, Drew, you want to finish? That's kind of like the second part of the question.
Okay.
So that's specific.
Well, there are some Nepenthes species that are more tolerant that I've found, and sibuyanensis is one of those. You can grow that one. It's got a wide range too. I don't know if you've been, François, have you been to that mountain?
No, not that one. But I found out that most Filipino species are quite tolerant.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I found as well. Right. So I found that, and there's something, I don't know if there's something in the physiological structure that has to do with this, but the Philippine species are quite tolerant of wider ranges of temperatures, at least. I mean, there's a few exceptions here and there. Even the Bornean species are a little more tolerant of warmer temperatures. Like, I find the most picky ones are the Sumatran species. The Sumatran highland ones are that grow alongside the Barisan Range. We're talking Ovata, Spathulata, Singulata, Aristolochoides, definitely. Those are the ones to me that are Jambon and Jacquelinie, right? Those are. I basically have to have, until we built the ultra-highland grow room, I had to start those over basically from a rooted cutting every fall because they would tank over the summer, right? And they seem to me much more intolerant of the warm temps.
I agree about what you said about providing a delta. A few years back, I used to grow plants in a conservatory, and in summer it was far too hot. So in the day, it sometimes reached like 40 degrees Celsius. And at the night time, I just opened all the doors of a conservatory and it was like 28, 29. But in the long run, after 3 or 4 weeks, I could really see that the New Year's pictures were paler and that the plants were not well at all. So I think the delta is not enough. As long as you're far from the species' natural range, it's not good.
Here's a data point that so I don't think it's, I think that there is some, type of happy medium you could hit with like a constant temperature, or at least. So when I was searching for like, how do I grow highland Nepenthes in Texas, right? I was trying to answer that question a long time ago, right? Before I even thought about making the move out here. And we moved out here not to grow Nepenthes, but, more family reasons, right? So I went searching, around the world at different people who are growing Nepenthes successfully in hot environments. Japan had some of the most interesting cases to me. There's actually 2 air-conditioned greenhouses in the Kyoto Botanical Gardens. That one of them was really interesting. That it had everything there is like a constant, basically a 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure exactly what that translates to Celsius. And they did have some okay looking highland plants in that greenhouse. Like, I won't say that they were the healthiest looking plants, but like Nepenthes loyi, for example, they grew there and it looked pretty happy. But that greenhouse, I'm told, like at least during the warm months in Japan, which is like 4 or 5 months where it's actually quite hot, day and night, it's 68 degrees all the time there, right? So I know there's something to be said there that, if you can keep it cool, during the day, it might help it along, if you're struggling to get those night temps.
And the ICPS is having a 13th conference, international conference this May in Japan. And I hope to see some of you there. All right, so Tom and Hawken, we have a question from Ryan. And he says, can highland times highland hybrids grow long-term in lowland or intermediate conditions? So the question kind of is, can you get hybrid vigor from two highland species in a more wider range? So Tom, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So in my experience, hybrid vigor does seem to be a thing. I couldn't comment on the science behind exactly why that is, but even between two highlanders, I've often found that the offspring will be more vigorous and more tolerant and easier to grow than either of the parent species. That said, I definitely, in my experience, wouldn't suggest trying to grow highland hybrids in lowland conditions. I still think you'll observe that same effect that everyone here has already described, that kind of slow decline. They might be okay for a few months and you'll think, I've done it, they're thriving, but they really do start to struggle after a while when the temperatures are above ideal. Hawken, don't know about you.
Yeah, I would say I can comment a little bit on the scientific reason behind that is the species, they have over millions of years evolved to a particular niche in their environment, and they have genes that are perfectly fit for that environment. That environment is not quite the same as what we have in cultivation. So when you get a hybrid cross, you get a whole mix of genes that the hybrid can kind of pick from either parent, two different niches perhaps, and might have something that then becomes a lot more tolerant to our more generalistic environment that we have in cultivation. So that's where we kind of get heterosis, but it wouldn't be very adapted to any of those environments in the wild necessarily. But what I've seen, it kind of depends on what species you're talking about. Like a lot of people have said, the Philippine species are fairly tolerant plants. Like even if you have a really ultra highland species, it might be a little more tolerant to variable conditions. So crossing that with something else might bring in a little more tolerance. And that could be because the Philippines are further north. They experience a little bit more temperature and seasonal swings in conditions, who knows? But overall, like I've seen a lot of my hybrids, if they're straight highland, like my Hamada cross Edwardiana, if it gets warm, it is not a happy plant at all.
Yeah,
there's one right there for that same reason in there.
Yeah, and so
it doesn't like the warmth at all, or an intense lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I've just noticed too, because I've just moved house, and so I've got a new greenhouse and everything, and the plants are in different locations from the lights and such. The lower lights, the Hamada Eddy is growing a little better.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, it kind of depends on what species you're working with in the hybrids, but generally, if you're trying for like an ultra highland cross with an ultra highland plant, two things that really want it cold, the hybrid, as a result, is also going to want it really cold.
Yeah, it's just not in the genome. All right, so Drew he did an entire webinar about lighting for ICPS, and you can find that on our YouTube page or our Facebook page. So we don't want to replicate that, repeat ourselves. But since we just started talking about lighting, maybe Francois, do you want to start? I know there's different countries, different islands, but generally speaking, if you can do such a thing, compared to maybe lowland species, what do highland Nepenthes like in terms of lighting, or what have you seen?
Oh, it really just depends on the species. I mean, if you, I tend to provide bright lights for most of my species, but I mean, highland species like Gymnomphora, they can withstand shade quite easily. So I just try to provide a device which will be some kind of a average, because I cannot afford to have different types of lamps. But as a general rule, I would say they need bright light.
And do you see that, Francois, in that bright light? Do you adjust that height according to the leaf growth or color?
If I can, actually, right now I don't have a conservatory anymore. I have kind of an indoor greenhouse, which you can see.
Right. Even so, with that though,
Yeah,
Are you having to move the plants
I have to move them. Yeah.
to
Because
juggle?
sometimes they're
Right.
just too far from the lights, and you can see, but it doesn't work. So I have to move
Right.
them.
I mean, I
all
have
the
to do
time.
the same thing in this
Yeah,
chamber is
exactly. Yeah.
trying to move them around and
Mhm.
find a happy place.
Yeah.
Okay.
In nature, I was just sometimes surprised because we tend to think that if the plants grow in like say suboptimal conditions, they will grow etiolated with minor pitches. But sometimes some of the species can be really tolerant to. So I have a Nepenthes singulana here, and I've seen in the wild that like really bright light, sometimes intense during the daytime. But I could find in the wild also very nice specimens with big pitches, very toothy, in let's say dapple shade.
I have my greenhouse covered in shade net, like a luminet, to try and keep the temperatures down in summer, which is really effective, by the way. But I found that they will still grow very happily, like with the shade over the greenhouse, without any supplemental lighting inside. That said, I no longer supplement with LEDs in the winter. I used to. I have some under benches now for seedlings just to help them along throughout winter, but I don't have like big grow lamps across my greenhouse benches anymore in the winter. They definitely slow down, especially given the really short daylight hours here in the UK in the winter. But it doesn't affect them next season. You know, as soon as the days start to get longer, they'll start to grow faster again. But yeah, the pitches and the leaves and the plants generally look a lot more healthy the more light they get within reason. And yeah, I agree. Bright light is the sort of general rule of thumb when I'm growing under artificial lamps.
Yeah.
Drew, anything to add?
So I found this, right? So you always have to deal with this relationship where if you're giving the plants a lot of light, a lot of times you're in a greenhouse where that also means a lot of heat is getting trapped too. So you can try to manage that. You can obviously in summer, you can cut down on the light by throwing on shade cloth, and that will that will help your plants along if you're fighting the temperatures. But I found this: if you dial your temperatures in right on, highland Nepenthes can take a lot of light. Like you can blast them and they will be happy as long as they're getting fed, right? Because they're doing this thing where they're growing and they're going to put out big pitchers if you're blasting with a lot of light, but they're taking a risk there. They're risking the fact that they need a lot of nutrients to continue growing, right? So they're putting out these big pitchers. You feed them, they'll continue to do that. They're going to continue to grow, continue to put out big pitchers. And the other thing that's interesting here is actually Andrei Pavlovic did a research study on Nepenthes talangensis, and he found that by feeding them through the pitchers, it actually caused a response in root growth. One of these things, right, is like if they're producing big pitchers for you to feed them a lot, if you throw a lot of insects in there at that time, you're also going to get a lot of root growth too.
Recently, say last year, been messing around with some straight up nice akadama mixes for some Hamada crosses, the Hamada Eddie I have as well.
All right, so akadama is like a clay pellet, a clay medium. So anybody can answer that, but yeah, when you do, can you talk about all highland species? Are there specific highland species that need that mix?
Well, that's where I was going to go. Is there any that you're specifically using straight up, or using partial, maybe 50-50 with your typical LFS and Paralite?
Yeah, Drew, you want to go first?
Sure. Okay, so there's a lot of Nepenthes that grow on ultramorphic mountains. That doesn't mean that they grow on ultramorphic mountain that they are rooted in ultramorphic substrate. For example, like you find loei all over the Kinabalu range, you will never find a loei rooted in the ground in ultramorphic substrate. They're always epiphytic. Maybe a few kind of terrestrial and sphagnum. So I've tried it, the experiments with some of the ones that don't really grow in the ultramorphic substrate with the akadama and in the mixes, and they still do pretty well. I think it's more the fact that it's it drains well, and it's kind of you're able to get that happy place where like it's wet but not too wet for those species. But I don't really notice a boost compared to the ones that grow in like a sphagnum-based mix. Where I do notice the boost definitely, like I can say definitively, like 100% is like the ones that actually grow in an ultramorphic substrate. Like we're talking like Raja, Attenburyi. Those ones definitely have a boost whenever you put them in akadama mix.
And the second question in regards to that, for those who have been on the tours and visited in the natural habitat, the threshold overlay between the intermediate and highland species, have you ever seen there the highland is kind of starting to move down and migrate into more intermediates? You know, that area, is there such an area that is occurring in the wild?
What I've seen in the wild is that when I found highland plants that I met sooner than expected in, let's say, an intermediate range, most of the time it was like dwarfed plant or plants that did not look really well, or pitchless plants. It's like they really restricted to their range, and sometimes you can find some kind of oddballs going a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, but
right, you would find them that it
yeah.
wasn't optimal conditions.
Yeah,
they weren't picturing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I found is so the montane zones are very distinct, or like whenever you're on a tropical mountain. So the habitat changes. Like if say like a mid-montane forest to like an upper montane forest, and so intermediate Nepenthes are going to grow more in like a mid-montane forest than an upper montane forest, which you're going to get trees that are more dwarfed. It's just going to smell differently. There's a different microflora, microfauna.
Yes.
You're going to get more, perpetually wet environments that have sphagnum, more epiphytes, just because it stays more moist and kind of cloud foresty up there. It's just going to be a different environment. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is you like François mentioned, on a small mountain, these montane zones are kind of squished. They're like Kinabalu. Mount Kinabalu is a gigantic mountain. By most standards. You can get mid-montane zones pushing up all the way, about, I don't know, 1,800 or so meters or so, where another mountain, it might end at like 1,400 meters. So like the elevation doesn't necessarily, you need to know the mountain, because, the elevation might not necessarily tell you what montane zone that plant is growing in, right? So like, I mean, for example, I found Nepenthes tentaculata at 800 meters on some mountains that were not very tall.
Yeah, I remember in Borneo, I went in a mossy forest in Sarawak in Gunung Satumbong. I saw Veitchii and Tentaculata. It was like 700 meters, while in Cambodia, when you're at 700 meters, it's quite dry. You see ant plants, but you cannot find a mossy forest at the elevation. So it really depends on the mountain, on the country.
Yep.
All right, let's keep talking about soil, because I feel like that's a major contribution to growing Nepenthes success. So François, do you use the same substrate for all of your highland Nepenthes? Are you differentiating for each of them?
Like I say, my time is limited with when it comes to growing plants, so I try to find the good average. When I grow mossy forest species, I tend to grow them in pure sphagnum or with a bit of perlite, and I try to have like 2 or 3 recipes and not different stuff. The only exception would be for species like it's not highland species, but Nepenthes like Nepenthes pervelii or Nepenthes viardii, where I know, but if I don't do something specific, I won't be able to grow them. But otherwise, I try to use like 2 or 3 recipes maximum.
All right, Tom, what about you? What's your soil recipes?
So I use the same mixture for most of my plants, and that is long fiber sphagnum moss, perlite, and orchid bark in a quite a sort of loose, chunky, airy mixture. Sort of my go-to, works really well. That said, there are a few species which I've noticed really do respond very well to a different mix. So Drew already mentioned Raja, and that's been my experience as well. I grow Raja in like an ultramafic substrate, and what's really interesting about that species is the root growth in response to repotting into like a ultramafic substrate. Like I grow my Raja in an enormous pot. It looks so like outsized, and yet it grew to fill it remarkably quickly given the species reputation, and it was like pot bound, you know, the roots literally snake around the bottom of this enormous pot. So yeah, Raja in particular responds very well to a different mix, and Attenborii as well. Not quite so much dramatic root growth, but yeah, my Attenborii, I definitely prefer that as well.
I agree about the size of the containers. Actually, I think from the beginning of a Zoom meeting, it's not only about like one factor like light or substrate, but a combination. If you give a good substrate, but you don't give a good size container, it won't work. I have a friend who use mostly akadama, but with huge containers, and his plants are gorgeous. While me, with my limited size and my small containers, the plants do not look as good as his.
All right, Hawken, let's talk about your soil, but then I want to go back to Francois's point about maybe root bounding. So Hawken, what are you using for highland Nepenthes soils?
So because I love technical little details, I will kind of modify my general recipe for any specific plant based on what I know of what it's growing on in the wild. So like people have mentioned Lowii, I have, first off, I have it on the floor in the basement in the greenhouse. So it's fairly cold down there. So I will actually stratify the greenhouse based on how high up in the space it is, because it's warmer up top. But I will also grow, that one is in more of a sphagnum based mix with a little bit of perlite, a little bit of other stuff in there. Whereas other species, like I am just starting to repot a lot of things right now since I have the space. I am using, I don't think it's akadama that I actually ended up getting, whatever it is. I think it was mislabeled, but it's some sort of clay-like rocky substrate. But the plants that I am repotting that into are already starting to respond a lot better. So a lot of my Philippines, Mantelinga janensis, Jantungensis, so on and so forth. I am moving into more akadama-based substrates. If it's a species that's like really epiphytic, I will often kind of loosen that up with more perlite, more orchid bark, so that it's a really loose, airy soil. Plants that are more maybe swamp growers, like I've heard a lot of references for, say, Clossii likes it fairly wet and peaty. So I've put that into kind of a sphagnum and peat moss mix with a little bit of other stuff, and it's been doing really well. So each species, I will take what I know of its environment and what other people have said it's done well in, and try and kind of modify the soil specifically for that off of a general base of like sphagnum, perlite, orchid bark. And I've found certainly there are definitely some species that maybe it's not necessarily that they need something like truly ultramafic, like the akadama seems to kind of mimic, but they certainly like some sort of mineral aerated soil. Like my Nepenthes hamada was not very happy for the first like 8 months that I had it. It would grow, make a little pitcher, but then it wouldn't make any roots or anything. I added just a little pinch of the mineral stuff that I've got right around its roots, and the thing has exploded. Like it's not even through the whole pot, it's just right near the roots. I added a little bit just to try and see if it would do anything, and the plant has quadrupled in size since then. So it does seem to be very beneficial for those species to have good aeration, a little bit of mineral in the soil. Nepenthes Raja, as people have mentioned, is another one that really likes that mineralized soil, the akadama or kanuma or so on. The one that I have needs to go into a bigger pot because it's exploded in the kind of half and half akadama sphagnum mix that I've got. So I'll be putting it into a pot that looks like a Raja pitcher soon. So
Hawken, can you share what your mineral fertilizer supplement? Is this something you're buying, or is this something you're making yourself?
What I bought, it was labeled, like I got a bag that was labeled as akadama soil, but it looks more like it's got like an akadama film over some other loose porous rock.
And you just added that to the hamada root near the roots.
Yeah, I took just a little small handful. I lifted up some of the moss and I put it under there, put it down, and the thing exploded. So
it's funny that you mentioned that because I have a Hamada female, and my standard mix, like the rest of you, I use for everything, and it didn't do so well. And I got that from, I got it from Drew, I think last year, and it stayed green, it stayed alive, slow, and just didn't show the growth. Just it was like I'm here, but I'm not happy. And I moved it into that mix. And because I
Whatever
can't,
it is about that mixed soil, just a little bit of the mineral.
so
maybe.
this is it now. It's got 1, 2, 3, some little pictures going.
Nice one.
Nice.
This is, yeah. So I saved it, Drew. Doing
Glad
good.
to hear that.
It's about the
Yeah.
size where mine is right now.
So it's straight up. I got a little bit of moss on top, but after, I mean, I noticed it in literally less than 30 days. I saw a drastic change, you know, kudos.
So Drew, to follow up on Francois' point about large pots, do you find that highland Nepenthes do better in larger pots, or is it all Nepenthes, or is it really the drainage?
It's really, I mean, it's your whole setup, and I wish I could give you a really specific answer here, but I'll say this: like, I think there's more harm that can be done like over potting a highland Nepenthes than under potting a highland Nepenthes, right? They want that drainage. They don't want to stay waterlogged. Yeah, a lot of my plants, we don't move them up, huge pot jumps, right? Like we're not going from like a 4-inch pot to an 8-inch pot. Usually it's like progressively up, like, 4-inch to 6-inch, something like that. I use net pots for the ones that I'm worried about aren't going to get enough drainage. That seems to help a little bit. And then the soil, I usually use more aggregate for the ones that are more epiphytic. Like Loei, definitely, like that's one that I put a lot more perlite into mixes for. I'll say, like, it depends on your watering though. Like I've got 2 very different environments how we grow our highland Nepenthes, right? I've got a grow room that has only fogging. There's no mist in that room. Like it's just there's just a fogger, so it stays humid. So I can use more dense mixes in there. Like actually, I can actually use sphagnum in there, like pure just sphagnum moss in there, and like living sphagnum will grow and all of that, and the plants will do just great, right? But if I try to do that in our highland greenhouse, it's got a high pressure fogging system that kicks on quite a bit in the summer to try to keep things cool. Those plants will rot out. Those pots, if I have a pure sphagnum, those plants are going to rot out. It's going to stay too wet long term. So it's all about kind of figuring out kind of what the dynamics of it or that soil are over time for me.
Tom, can you talk a bit about avoiding mold and rot and how you achieve that?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I do. After running the greenhouse for a few years, I kind of find that you start to get a sense of whether a plant needs watering or not just by kind of lifting the pot a little. Like rather than trying to feel it and see how wet it is, I'll kind of walk around and just lift the edge of each pot. And if it's like, yeah, exactly, like how much water is it? And the ones that you've repotted more recently, where the roots haven't progressed through the pot yet, you'll feel they retain moisture for a lot longer. And I'll be like, okay, I'll leave another week before giving that one some more, so you can feel it just based on how waterlogged the soil is. The other thing I found is quite helpful, particularly here in the UK, is I have like circulation fans in the greenhouse just to encourage some air movement. I find that really helps, gets me through the very cold winters here in the UK, just having some air movement. So yeah, that helps prevent the mold as well. Anyone else got any tips on that?
Francois, what about your little grow tent?
I would say that something important for me is ventilation. Yeah, I really have to be careful with that. Otherwise, everything will be too wet and I get mold or waterlogged pots. So I think that ventilation is kind of underestimated sometimes.
How do you balance humidity, or is humidity a non-factor, and ventilation in your setup?
I have a small fogger, so I just try to set it differently. Sometimes I open the door. It's very lo-fi setup. It's in my studio, and to have low temperatures, I just open the window all night long, you know, except when it rains, of course.
All right, now,
like mine.
yeah, Hawken, I want to know about
So
your
far it
setup.
works.
But
And
first,
so,
I mentioned I'm wearing my super cool t-shirt, and I mentioned that there's the link in the description below, but I forgot to mention that every year on the first Wednesday of May, we have World Carnivorous Plant Day, and that logo with the cephalotus eating the world was painted by Francois. So thank you, Francois.
You're welcome.
And all his other
Nice,
amazing
very
artwork.
nice.
It
Funny
is
enough,
amazing
Francois,
artwork.
Yeah.
Amongst
more
all of your
artwork
other,
from Francois there. That was from
Thank you.
Francois last year.
Oh yeah.
Thanks.
all right, Hawken, what about your setup? How are you avoiding mold and rot?
yeah, so I've never really had much of an issue with my highland plants because wherever I put them, even if it's a fairly enclosed tent, it's always been near some sort of either the house air conditioning system or something that's just kind of pushing air through whatever openings is in there. So it just keeps things kind of rolling. Plus the evaporative cooler that I have, it's a big fan. So whenever that turns on in the greenhouse, that's circulating things around. My issue is actually more with when I in my previous little greenhouse when I was growing the lowlanders is right near the door where it was a little bit cooler, you would get condensation all over the plants. And so to avoid something like that, you just kind of need air that circulates through the entire greenhouse. If you have a big enough space, just like the heating of the lights even will do that for you because air will rise up and that'll bring the cooler air that's a little bit drier up from the ground, and that'll kind of circulate things. Just adding a small fan can be enough in a fairly small location to keep that air movement going around. I can't speak for a bigger setup, but certainly if you just have a small space, just having one open vent somewhere and having a small fan or some system to just kind of move air through the system will help kind of dry out the condensation that might build up on the leaves or near the sides where there will be issues. And so you can avoid getting the water that's just like sitting on the plants and inviting bacteria and fungus. So.
All right, panel, we're almost out of time, but we do have a couple of questions from the audience. Drew, Maggie's Shop of Horrors would like to know, what's the best time to take a basil off to support multiple growth points? So maybe seasonal or maybe size-wise?
So I would actually encourage to take a top cut as opposed to a basil if you can. I mean, basils will root. But one of the things that I found, you know, that's goes against kind of what you might have read in older literature is you want the pictures. You want pictures on cuttings. That is how the plants are going to get nutrient. That is how the plants can even get water through their pitchers. So I wait till there's some pictures either on a basil or on a cutting before I take it, and then I'll keep those on. And you know, we've had way higher success rates that way.
Even when like the leaf is, you know, 12 inches.
Yeah. I mean, the thought was that if you cut them in half, then you limit transpiration, but at the same time, you're limiting what can get plants its nutrients, which is the pitchers, and they're very important. Right.
And this
something interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, is this going to have like one node, or like the cutting, would it have two leaves?
Yeah, you're safe. The bigger the cutting, usually the better. Like for us, at least. Well, you don't want to go crazy. You know, like make like a 10 node cutting, but I would say I noticed 2 or 3 node cuttings work best as opposed to like a 1 node cutting.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah.
Something interesting that I've noticed, and I wonder whether anyone else here has seen, is quite often on bigger plants, I'll find that when a plant pops a new basil shoot, if you leave it on and you just let that grow naturally, quite often it will rapidly overtake the original sort of growth point vine, and you will get much bigger pitchers, much big healthy leaves, to the point where it just overtakes the original growth, and you'll get I get enormous pitchers on, for example, I've got an Afipiata, and the first growth point has been left behind by the second one, you know, whereas now I'm getting like intermediates on the new growth. So I guess that's another argument for taking a top cutting off the old growth, as opposed to just slicing off the basil.
We noticed the same thing, Tom. Yeah, so like you actually really need to feed a plant that's struggling to maintain a basal and a top growth. You really need to feed that plant and make sure it's in ideal conditions for it to maintain both. Because the basal may just take over everything, and the top will just slowly get smaller and smaller. And by the time it's really shrinking, it's going to be difficult to root that as well because it doesn't, have as many resources.
Yeah.
Drew, do you like foliar feeding or feeding the pitchers, or are you doing both in that situation?
Feeding the pitchers,
Feeding the
preferably.
pitchers.
Foliar feeding, I've never experimented with it like as scientifically as I'd like to. I don't think it's detrimental, but what I do think is detrimental is getting too much fertilizer into the soil. Actually, so if I can say anything, like just as a caution to anybody, I want to say this. We're talking about rot. Healthy sphagnum moss does not equal healthy Nepenthes. Let me repeat this. Healthy sphagnum moss does not equal healthy Nepenthes. So for a while, there's been some big growers around the years. I know we're short of time. I can give some examples, but at least for me, I noticed this. I had mounds of sphagnum growing in a really good highland greenhouse when I lived in California. I was fertilizing with Maxi and some other things. Sphagnum was just coming up in bushels. The plants look great. Like it looks like they were full of nutrients, healthy leaf color. And then after I did that for about 6 months, crash. Everything. It was like within a week of each other, all these highland Nepenthes, like the temperatures were great, everything. You could just tell that they'd been like running off of whatever nutrient they sucked up with the minimal roots they had. And then all of a sudden, bang, like I had to repot everything, my entire collection. I was lucky that I had the time at that point. I was in between jobs. So like I just went in there and just threw all the mix. It turned to mush essentially, right? So like what happens is with sphagnum, it likes it wet. It likes a lot of nutrient in the soil. But that mush, that's prime place for root rot right there, right? So you got to be real careful, just because your sphagnum is looking healthy, don't get over cocky with that, because I definitely did, and I definitely lost a bunch of plants, and I have some other growers who that happens, very similarly too.
In another video on ICPS's YouTube page, we talk about fertilizer, and we mentioned that you can use like Osmocote 16-16-16 pellets, like 1 to 5 of them per pitcher. Or if you're on social media, you'll see people like squirting Maxi dilutions in the pitcher. So maybe we can go around and we all say how we're fertilizing. Go ahead, Drew.
Oh yeah, so we do we feed let's see, we use Osmocote and NutriCote pellets into the pitchers. We'll also do we're very careful with it. We'll use some Osmocote or NutriCote into the soil, but you got to be really careful with how much you're using. And there's a big difference between how much lowlanders and highlanders will absorb. Highlanders much less. We also, for the ones I'm really babying, I use crushed cricket powder. There's actually a factory in Austin that sells like, it's like sacks of cricket flour, right? And so I just a pinch in there, and that can really accelerate growth, I've noticed. Actually, even more so than like putting fertilizer into the pitcher, but we do that as well with Maxi.
Are you doing the NutriCote and Osmocote once a month, 2 times a month, or whenever you have a pitcher?
Usually NutriCote and Osmocote, only 1 per pitcher. You don't want to overwhelm it. You can get premature pitcher rot if you put too many.
And you go through everything once a month, or every time you have a new pitcher,
every new pitcher.
Okay.
Yeah, every new pitcher. But I can't. I mean, we've got a gigantic collection, so at this point we can't. So we'll just use either NutriCote or Osmocote, into the soil, mixed in, at a very, dilute ratio. Borneo Exotics republished this. I don't know why more people don't reference this. It's 1 Osmocote pellet per centimeter of pot size. Like that's kind of, but play around with that, right? Like you can, highland Nepenthes a little less, lowland Nepenthes maybe a little bit more, right? And then we'll use Maxi as well, just usually in the springtime, just to give them a quick kick, because that's it's not extended release, so it's just like to get them started and get them going.
What ratio do you use in Maxi?
Maxi, we use for adult plants, depending on the time of year, either 1 or 200 ppm. It's pretty dilute.
Yeah. Okay.
And
right.
maybe we might be able to be more aggressive, but I told you my trauma of over fertilizing with Maxi, so I try to avoid that.
Thank
So
you for,
Drew, sorry. So Drew, you don't fertilize all year round, right? You
No.
like you target some times of the year, like spring.
Yeah. Spring, when they're experiencing the most rapid growth, is a time where we'll definitely hit fertilizers harder. And this is so older plants are going to be the ones that probably need it the least compared to younger plants. You can really move younger plants along with fertilizer more.
Okay.
And that's probably true of a lot of carnivorous plants. I mean, Sarracenia, right? You can hit those so hard with so many things, right? When they're young, but then when they get old, they get real fussy, right?
That's true.
anybody else want to share their fertilizer regimen? And then I have one last question.
That's fine.
I use Osmocote, and with the chambers, I'm able to. A friend of mine owns a herb store in Oldsmar, so I can go in and get from crickets, live crickets, pinheads, little pinheads, right up to whatever, and just release them and let them do their thing. So, does anybody do any CO2 enrichment?
Only when I get dry eyes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. I would love to hear some of these experiences with that.
Well, I'm actually, that's what I started doing 2 weeks ago on both these chambers. I've got a 20-pound aluminum CO2 tank.
Ooh, okay.
And a regulator, some monitoring system, and I've actually been trying to suffocate some thrips.
Oh yeah, nice.
With like 30,000 ppms for like 3 hours straight. I don't know what else to do. They kind of, because of my lack of circulation in the big chamber, I added some 120 computer fans, 120 millimeters. And I read that I could suffocate them and kill them.
That works, and if all else fails, predatory nematodes.
They're on their way. They're out for delivery.
All right, James.
So,
I look forward to reading that article in the next CPN Carnivorous Plant newsletter.
okay then.
So the last question, and everyone I hope can answer. Blake would like to know, could you list a couple strict highland plants and other highland plants that are labeled highland, but you've been able to grow successfully in more intermediate conditions? So maybe if everyone could just name like 1 to 3 plants that are maybe advertised as highland, but then you're like, oh, actually, I've been able to grow it in different conditions, or a highland plant where you're like, yeah, this definitely needs this cool 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. Tom, you want to share a couple of plants that you've had experience with?
Sure. Probably won't be the most surprising answer, but I found that my Velosa, Diabolica, those are the two that stand out in my mind as being particularly fussy and that I really have struggled with in the past in summer. So I've got like a little summer routine now. I know exactly where in the greenhouse I put all my Velosa and Diabolica to keep them happy. In terms of plants that are labeled as highland, I know it has quite a broad range, but Veitchii and its hybrids, even the barrio forms I found like can be very happy in warmer conditions. Yeah, that's probably
all right. James, do you can talk about species or hybrids that need highland conditions and maybe some that don't?
Well, with my experience, and I've got probably 300 plants behind me just on my porch. I've realized that some of the hybrid highlands will do quite well down into an intermediate, as long as you do have that temperature change. Okay.
Can you give us a specific name?
Okay.
Cross?
Okay. Spatulata hamata. Okay. Both thrive in highland as a species, and they do love it, obviously. But I've gotten them to like, 84 degrees, 85 degrees during the day. all day long, and just going down to like 76 at night, 77, not even going 10 degrees in the fluctuation, and thriving. For those who may follow me, I showed the spatulata hamata 3712 BE, which I actually got from Kenny years ago. It just thrived. It thrived more so in the intermediate than it did in my house or the Highland chamber.
I've had a similar experience with Spatulata jacquelineae, which is kind of surprising. Yeah. Highlanders, and it thrives.
It was with the one that got attacked by the thrips and totally devastated it. It had 3 basils and it was doing great, but that they do good, and as well as the hamatas. I think the straight up hamatas are really finicky, whether it's a diabolica red hairy hamata, aka, or either one of the variation locales of hamatas. They're pretty finicky, pretty picky on their establishment as what they want and when they want. Don't move them around. Once you find the place, that's it.
Yeah.
Don't move
look
them.
at it.
Let them go.
François, what about you?
I don't have a species in mind, but I found that species like Boursiana, Vogelii, but I used to grow in highland conditions can thrive even in intermediate conditions, even lowland for Boursiana. I was really surprised. Yeah.
I was going to ask Drew about Vogelii as well.
Yeah, it's growing well. It's growing well. Yeah, it's pitching. It's still a kind of small plant. I don't know if it will make it to the adult size. One species I tried multiple times in let's say suboptimal highland conditions and it didn't work was Nepenthes argentii. It really is a highland plant to me. It's not one of those Filipino species that are quite tolerant.
All right, Drew, you wanna give us a couple?
Okay, in terms of everybody wants to grow hamata, I always point them to ventricosa hamata. I think that one's pretty tolerant. I've grown that all the way down to Lake Lowland. So that one, let's see, one interesting one that's come out into the market that's getting widespread that is a phenomenal plant is ventricosa lowii. It's got a lot of those lowii characteristics and it grows in a wide range of conditions. They did a really good job picking that clone out. I think it's being mass produced in China, but you can get it in nurseries all over the place. And let's see, in terms of species, or at least like highland plants, like, the collectors would want to grow, sibuyanensis has been really resilient for me in like warmer conditions. And True Martinez, actually, once you get one of those going, in my experience, those things are tanks. They, and so you can get a really nice big toothy thing going. And then I'd say like sibuyanensis as well. Sibuyanensis, ventricosa is that's well.
Casiana as well. I used to grow successfully Casiana in lowland conditions.
Oh yeah, Casiana, yeah.
All right, Hawken, what about you?
Yeah, François mentioned Nepenthes bauschiana already, which I would also echo on that because I've got a female that I actually started off just trying to grow in lowland conditions, or it went to intermediate in winter, which it was happier in, but it would still grow in pitcher, and that's the only time it ever flowered for me, interestingly enough. Another one that's sibuyanensis is another one. It does like some humidity, especially around the tendrils to pitcher, but otherwise temperature-wise, it seems pretty tolerant. Anything in the Fusca complex seems pretty good. They're usually labeled as more or less highland, but they're fairly tolerant plants. Some of the ones that definitely do not like hot temperatures at all, Aristolachioides, we've already mentioned. Glabrata, I've actually found likes it cool and humid for me. When it gets to summer, it stops pitchering. It starts making some weird growths if it gets too warm. So it likes cooler conditions here at least, and the humidity especially for pitchers. So.
All right, we are out of time. So I want to thank the panel for sharing their experiences and growing techniques. And we hope that everyone has a good day. And if you have a roundtable idea topic, please send me a message. All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Pleasure meeting
Bye,
everyone
guys.
finally.
Pleasure.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
It's not a
Bye.
surprise that gardeners, educators, and scientists are fascinated by these unique plants. The International Carnivorous Plant Society, or ICPS, not only love these plants, but welcomes growers just getting started all the way through professional scientists. The ICPS even started an annual World Carnivorous Plant Day to celebrate them. The free online event is held the first Wednesday of May. Take a look around our website and you'll find historic documents about carnivorous plants, growing guides, free educational resources, and more. Have questions? Ask. We don't bite, but our plants do.